Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, experiment is an investigation which is looking for cause and effect relationship. If you want, you can take notes on this as well.
Okay.
Jotได้นะ jot ได้ The researcher investigates the way one variable is called the independent variable, or we're gonna call it the IV. So the IV is responsible for the effect in another, which is the dependent variable. So to test this, the researcher manipulates the IV to produce two or more conditions, such as high or low light level or early or late in the day. The effects of these conditions on the dependent variables is measured. For example, an independent variable of light level might affect attention, with people being better at paying attention when the light levels are high. Or
Really?
it's just an example.
Oh.
We have
Okay.
not tested yet. ก็คนง่ายเหมือนกันนะเราเนี่ย So, or another example could be how well people pay attention would be the DV. If there is a big difference in the dependent variable between the conditions, the researcher would conclude that the independent variable can cause the difference in the dependent variable. You know, like for example, like that light levels affect attention, etc., etc. So in order to be more certain that the difference between the conditions is caused by the independent variable, the researcher needs to control any other variables that might affect the dependent variable. For example, people might find it more difficult to be attentive if they have eaten, exercised, or sat through a very dull class. So those factors are called extraneous variables. Extraneous variables should therefore be controlled, like keep the same condition, maybe after eating, or is that gonna be the like same dual class, or like that would be like more excited class. So the levels of the IV being compared by two or more experimental conditions, such as a bright or two artificial lights, or maybe one or more experimental conditions. So if you can see in here on the screen, if you see the picture on the corner left, reveal that independent variables can create several conditions to influence dependent variables, and extraneous variables, the word extra, so we don't want that to happen. Good so far? Ready to go next? Okay, so experimental condition. The levels of the independent variables can be compared to two or more independent variables, or there may be one or more experimental conditions which are compared to a controlled condition. So the control condition is simply the absence of the experimental variable. For example, in a comparison of the effect of eating chocolates on paying attention, we might compare either the effect of eating one bar or two bars of chocolates, two experimental conditions, or the effect of eating one bar or no chocolate bar at all. One experimental condition and the other one is control. So in this case, if you see the picture here, this one is the experiment is will the student test scores be affected by distracting sounds in the testing environment? So we have control group or control condition, which is like a normal study atmosphere, like what normal people should do. And then we have the experimental group or experimental condition where there's a whole band playing while studying, and then you predict the result.
Okay.
So what do you think the result would be?
Control groups tend to focus better. Well, I mean, the result is that the music in the background will distract the students and it will affect their test scores because they can't focus. That did not sound like a research answer.
But it's still the answer, as a matter of fact.
Yeah,
more or less.
But yeah, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yes. Okay, so next, let's take a look research method in practice. Let's do something more practical. So normally it's a lab experiment, right? Where it consists of like independent variable, dependent variables, and strict controls. So still looking for a cause and effect relationship that is conducted in a setting that it's not in the usual environment for the participants, with regards to the behavior that they are performing. For example, of scenario, a researcher might conduct a lab experiment to test the effect of the independent variable of time of the day on the dependent variables of happiness of students. So they may choose to control the extraneous variables, such as which lessons that the students were in, or whether they had like recently eaten, since that might affect their happiness as well, because everyone happy when after they eat or eating. In this case, it would be a comparison between two experimental conditions.
Oh.
Because there are two conditions, so there would be like the one that like which subjects, and then the one whether they have eaten or not. If they want to try like one experimental condition and control, they could try like whether that student has like recently eaten or not. Like only one aspect. You follow through?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
What is EV again?
Extraneous variable here.
So that is like you would want to avoid that variable.
Mm-hmm.
Can you like control it?
Yes, we have to strictly control in order to avoid the extraneous variables.
Okay. So what's like one of the most crucial thing in every experiment that's like an extraneous variable? Like for example, like one common thing that is an extraneous variable.
Well, all of these are equally important because like independent variable cause conditions to affect dependent variables, but the importance of extraneous variables is the fact that we want to prevent it, because otherwise if it's happened, then it can interfere with the result and it would be difficult to interpret the result. Yeah.
So for given an example, if you want to do an experiment on how certain people feel certain way when it comes to this subject, but an extraneous variable is like when they become nervous in that experiment, something like that. Okay, cool.
There's actually one, I think you might remember, one experiment that they flashes words to students, like the neutral word and the taboo, like bad words.
Oh yeah.
And then the fact that they delay the answer, or like the words, like repeating the words, might be because the embarrassment that is like itself extraneous variable.
Okay.
จำได้ใช่ปะ So yeah, so the word extra, think it as like fats or lipids. We don't want extra fats in our body.
Okay.
Simple.
Okay. Yeah.
ใช่ไหม So next. So before we move on to next subtopic, do you have any questions?
Nope.